This is the Inner Chief Podcast, episode 367.
That means really being clear about what your goals are and what's important to you at each stage of your life. And as I said, I was very clear that particularly when my children were young, that they were my number one priority and work was my second priority. And I've got a background in strategy. So strategy at the end of the day is all about making trade-offs. So you have to work out, what your number one priority is and what the other priorities are, because invariably you've got limited resources and you can't do everything.
G'day, this is the Inner Chief Podcast, episode 367 with Nicolette Rubinsztein AM, professional board member and author on removing guilt, female confidence and overcoming busyness. I am your host, Greg Layton, founder of Chiefmaker and the Council of Chiefs. I believe there is a great chief in all of us, and that through listening to the stories, strategies and techniques of great CEOs and gurus, each of you can find and leave your own legacy through your work and life. The Inner Chief Podcast is where you will learn how to think and make moves like a CEO, like a true chief. For over a decade, I've helped CEOs and senior executives around the world boldly lead change, inspire their people, and leave a legacy. On the Inner Chief Podcast, I bring these stories to life with deep diving CEO interviews, interspersed with minisodes covering key leadership challenges, so you will find your own path to greatness as an executive. In this episode, we replay a chat I had with Nicolette Rubinsztein in 2019. Nicolette is a qualified actuary and is currently the chair of Greenpeace Australia Pacific and CBHS Health Fund and a non-executive director at Zurich, Australia. She has previously been a director at UniSuper and OnePath Insurance and was the president of the Actuaries Institute of Australia for 4 years. Nicolette received a member of the Order of Australia in the King's Birthday 2024 Honours List for her significant service to the finance and commerce sectors. She is also the author of a wonderful book called Not Guilty, a powerful book providing strategies for successful career mums. In this Best of Series Masterclass, Nicolette Rubinsztein will share the resilience learnt from losing her job twice due to an overnight industry change, how to balance work with motherhood without feeling guilty or putting her career on hold, why lower confidence in females has led to a lower uptake of STEM careers, and overcoming business as parents and the concept of career mum staff. So without further ado, Chiefs, let's hear from the Best of Series guest, Nicolette Rubinsztein AM. Nicolette, welcome to the Inner Chief Podcast.
Thank you, Greg.
Nicolette, look, I'd love to start off with a bit of a story about your childhood and where you come from. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. I actually grew up in a small village in Yorkshire, England. And a couple of quirky things about my background. I was raised in a vegetarian family, and I'm actually a fourth generation vegetarian. We're raising our children vegetarian as well. And at the age of 11, I went to a Quaker boarding school in York for 2 years. And then when I was 13, my family emigrated, interestingly, from England to South Africa. And I went to high school in Durban. And at the age of 16, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So my mom sent me to a guidance counsellor at school. The guidance counsellor said to me, "What are you good at?" I said, "Maths." She seemingly opened this little pocketbook of careers on the letter A and said, "What about actuary?" And read out a couple of lines, something about probability theory, maths, statistics, well-respected and well-paid. And I said, "Sounds great." And on the basis of that 5 minutes of so-called advice, I set about studying to become an actuary for the next 10 years, basically.
So based out of Durban in South Africa then, what was it like living through that part of South Africa's history?
Yeah, it was amazing, particularly as you'd be aware that it was under apartheid regime at the time. So I had come from England. It was an incredibly eye-opening experience to see what was going on in South Africa. So when I lived there, it was full on apartheid. It was separate buses, separate beaches, separate schools, separate areas. But, I still find it almost traumatizing, I'd say, to look back that I lived through that part of history. And I feel bad that I didn't contribute more to, making that a better place and righting the wrongs, if you like. So, part of what we do now, we've been supporting a charity in a township called Mission Vale for about 15 years. And I've taken the kids now a couple of years volunteering there. And I'm going to try and do that every year, actually. Africa is a very important part of my background now.
Yeah, we both share a bit of a connection to South Africa. With my sister works in a township school over there as well, and it's just wonderful to see so many people now doing their very best to improve the lives of so many people there. So well done. And an important thing is, I think all the profits from your book go to the charity Mission Vale. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. So look,
Africa has an amazing energy about it, and once you've lived there, you can't get that out of your system, actually.
True. Now, listen, we're going to put all the details of your book in the show notes. So please, if you're interested in the book, make sure you buy it because the profits do go directly to that charity. So now, listen, let's talk a bit about a couple of very important questions. I always love to know, what was the very first car you ever had that you drove around in?
Yeah, well, amazingly, I only really had my own car when in my 30s. So I got married quite early. We got married when I was 23, and after that we shared a car. So it was actually my early 30s before I got my own car, and it was a Jeep Limited. I don't know if you know what that is.
Yeah, like a Jeep Grand Cherokee or something.
Yeah, I love that car.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Sensational. Now, listen, I'd like to dive all in here. Like, you've had a magnificent career and you got to some general management roles. Can you tell us a bit about your life, perhaps before motherhood, because that's led to this whole book and the work you do now. But what was your career like before that?
Yeah, well, my first job was in an actuarial department for an insurance company in Cape Town. So, I'll leave that to your imagination. But I was only there for a year or so, and then my husband and I emigrated together to Australia. And I got my first job here for a superannuation consulting firm called Towers Perrin. And I was quite lucky to even get a job because that was 1993 and we were in the middle of the last recession that Australia had. Now, that job actually gave me an amazing grounding in superannuation, which I'm very grateful for, and really kind of was the foundation of my career here in Australia. But I have to say, after about 5 years, it did turn out that valuing defined benefit funds was not my thing. I remember having a bit of a career crisis at the time, thinking, is this actuary thing really for me? And wondering what I should do.
I just have to jump in quickly and just say something. Is this all right? I worked for Towers Perrin in Sydney. It was my grad role in 2000. Unbelievable, right? Superannuation fund there. It was my grad role as well. You were obviously in the Actuaries department. I was down in their service centre.
Oh, were you?
Yes, I was. Yep. I was there for about 2 years. So before I moved on to...
left by the time you arrived there. But
yes,
I'd left the year before. Oh, right.
Wow.
Amazing.
Well, that is an amazing coincidence. Anyway, sorry, go on. So you were a bit sick of working out the values of defined benefit funds, which is a particular superannuation fund type here in Australia, or a pension fund type. What happened next?
So I looked around at roles. I did consider, should I become a maths teacher at that stage? But I was quite drawn to roles in product development. And I took a role, product development for a wrap product, which was quite a very exciting area at the time, pretty cutting edge. It was a very steep learning curve for advanced funds management, and really, really enjoyed that. That was pretty challenging. But about 6 months into the job, St. George, who was ultimate owner, bought Asgard, which was the biggest wrap product in the country. So my job effectively blew up overnight, and I started looking around again. So I'd only been in that role about 6 months. I started looking around, and there was a job going at BT, again in product development for superannuation choice of fund. And I had a lot of friends working at BT. It was a really cool place to work. So I was really happy when they offered me the role. But then amazingly, about a few months into that job, the choice of fund legislation was deferred for 5 years. So that role also went up in smoke overnight. So that was quite amazing that I had two jobs that really ceased to exist within about a year. So it was a good lesson in resilience, that's for sure.
Yeah. Now, you ended up in a general management role at CBA, Commonwealth Bank of Australia, is that right?
That's right. I ultimately took a role as the general manager of strategy for Colonial First State, so in the wealth management arm of CBA.
Sure, yeah. Now, the next big thing, I suppose, that happens in your life is you start having some kids and it all gets very, very complex because now you've got to work out a career and children. So eventually you've written this magic book called Not Guilty, and I'd like to spend quite a bit of time talking about this because the opening line of your book says, as most working mums will confirm, guilt can be a pretty constant companion. Can you elaborate on this and explain perhaps why this is such a much bigger problem now than, in previous times or earlier times?
For our generation, we were really taught the world is your oyster, go off and do whatever you want. And I think many of us did. And then it comes to the having children bit and you realize, oh my goodness, having a career and being a mother is actually really hard. And no one really told me about how you could do both of these things. And I think the guilt comes from it's guilt from a work point of view because you worry that you're not delivering 100%. And it's guilt from a mother point of view that you feel guilty that you're not being the best mum possible. So, it really is guilt on all fronts if you're not careful.
And in your book, you use this magnificent McKinsey framework called 7S. And I'd like to go through some of these. And then this is about setting yourself up for success as a working mum. And the 7S framework has shared values as a core element in the middle, and then structure, style, skills, strategy, staff, and systems around the outside. Let's talk a bit about some of these because this is really, really important. You talk about how shared values are about getting on the same page and about what is most important to you and to your family and with your partner. When you're setting yourself up as a working mum, and let's be honest, this has got nothing more to do with just working mums. If you're married and you're a husband in the partnership, then this is just as important for you to think about, which is working out the values that you and your partner have so you can have a successful career. What are some of the values that need to be discussed so you can get on the same page? What are some examples of that?
I think the most important one is around the childcare and what role each of you is going to play in the childcare. And I'm really passionate that you have to have an explicit conversation about that. I think the best way to start is from the child's point of view and what percentage of that child's time do you want that child to be with a parent as opposed to in some sort of care, and then working out how each of you can contribute to that. And I think it's important to think about the research in this area. And the research pretty much says time with the parent is fantastic. And it also says time at preschool is fantastic. And schooling is obviously a given. Where it gets quite muddy is the daycare for really young children. I think that's where we have to be quite careful about, how much care we put our children in.
And do you have any guidelines around that would be good for people, or is it best for them to conduct a bit of their own research and work that out?
Yeah, I think everyone does have to work out their own solution to that. And because the research is quite muddy, different people's situations and different children will actually react differently. But my personal opinion is that you would want more than half of your child's life to be with a parent. So from my point of view, I think in those early years, before age 4, that you should probably try and limit it to 3 days of care.
Yep.
And, if I think about what the ultimate model would be, actually, it would be where both parents work flexibly and part-time. And if you both do the equivalent of about 4 days a week, it means that your child will only be in 3 days of care a week. 4 days of work, you can usually do, a job in 4 days, particularly if you make up a bit of time on weekends and that sort of thing. So, I actually think that that's a bit of a win-win situation. And I have seen more and more people doing that, more and more couples doing that kind of model.
Chief, do you need to get the right people in the right roles, or have some tricky individuals whom you're just not sure how to develop and grow? We have the ultimate resource for you. Go to chiefmaker.com/performance, and we have a tool there where you can systemize your performance assessment, work out the right moves to develop and grow and get people moving once again. Check it out at chiefmaker.com/performance. There's a particular part of your book where you almost talk about certain phases or chapters in your life where, particularly in your early years, it's all about being a professional and growing your career. And then you go into this period where you've got to raise your kids. When you go part-time, and you might have to just sacrifice a little bit of the rocketing up the career chart. But what I've found is that thinking about, instead of just thinking about right now, but expanding you to see your entire career and your entire life, takes a bit of the pressure away from having to achieve right now. Is that something you found as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I learned a lot from my mom from this point of view. So my mom was a stay-at-home mum until her early 40s. So she raised 4 children, and she ended up setting up her own insurance broking business when she was about 42. She's still running it, and she's 75. So wow. She started a brand new career in her 40s, and that career has spanned, more than 30 years. So she is a great example of focusing on one thing more than another at different phases of your life. And, these days, particularly my work as an actuary, I get to think a lot about what you do in retirement and what your retirement age is and all of that sort of thing. Basically, our increasing longevity means that many of us will be working well into our 70s. So this concept of trying to cram in all the achievement and the career success, I really think that we have to rethink that. In my case, I think when I look back, I think I've effectively put my career on hold probably for about 10 years while I was having children. And I've been working flexibly for the last 15 years. But in particular, I sort of ratcheted down the hours for that 10-year period. And, I feel really good about that decision. It was fantastic. And, now my kids are a bit older, I'm just starting to ramp things back up again.
I think this is such an important thing to work out with your partner because, life gets so busy, so chaotic. And if you haven't had the discussion to say, well, how are we going to raise these kids? What are our values? What percentage of time should they be in daycare? Who's going to do what role in this whole scheme to make this happen? What are our parenting rules? What kind of holidays we're going to have? All these kind of things are really important conversations because when they're not had, it's almost like each individual assumes that their angle is almost in play. And what that means is there's a huge opportunity for friction and misunderstanding in the relationship.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And I really think that your values come so much more apparent when you have children. And it's quite easy to operate, in sort of parallel universes before you have children. Things become much more apparent. And it is all of those things. It's about how much pocket money. It's about relationship with money. It's about punishment. It's about what values you're going to raise your children with. What do you want them to have out of life? It's about bedtimes. It's all of those things that you've probably never had a question about before.
Yeah. One of the great things about your book is that you've listed a whole bunch of things you should have a discussion about. So if you're not sure about what you want to have a discussion with your partner about, just go and get the book because it'll be there for you to have a read about and then have a really good discussion with your partner. Now, listen, there's a great quote that you mentioned, which is from Quentin Bryce, the former Governor General of Australia, and she says this: "For a long time now, I've been saying to women, you can have it all, but not all at the same time." Can you expand on that in more depth?
Yeah, I really think it's difficult to, let's take the extreme example, be a CEO and have small children all at the same time. And that means really being clear about what your goals are and what's important to you at each stage of your life. And as I said, I was very clear that particularly when my children were young, that they were my number one priority and work was my second priority. And, I've got a background in strategy. So strategy at the end of the day is all about making trade-offs. You have to work out, what your number one priority is and what the other priorities are, because invariably you've got limited resources and you can't do everything. And I think that those limited resources when you have children is really about your time, that you don't have time to do everything and you've got to work out what the most important thing is. I'll just reflect a little bit about my career. I was very lucky when I had my first child, that I was a general manager, as I said, at CBA. And I was allowed to, and I say allowed actually, I was allowed to work part-time and keep that general manager role. And that was very, very unusual at the time. There was hardly any part-time general managers. So it really was a big, big deal. So I ended up working 7 a.m. till 1 o'clock. And I worked in that manner for every day, but 7 till 1 for about 8 years. And as I said earlier, I very much, in my mind, my career was on hold. I absolutely loved my role, though, and I was very, very grateful for being able to have very stimulating and amazing job while still being able to work part-time. And I think that was very beneficial from the company's point of view, because in terms of retention and in terms of general job satisfaction. So I think it is a bit of a win-win situation. Very slowly over time, I've just started to reprioritize and invest more of my own time in my role. And about 3 years ago, I left CBA to start a career as a non-executive director. Interestingly, that role is also very conducive to flexible working, because the only days that I really work a full day will be when I have board meetings. And then the other days I often just work school hours, although I will do a lot of work on the weekends and in the evenings as well. But yeah, it just goes to show that, you can pick and choose when you do each part of your role and what you focus on, your role as a mother versus your job at work.
You said a couple of times that your career has been on hold. I think when you say that, I think a lot of our listeners might be like, gee, that's a bit scary to put it on hold. And I think this is almost at the crux of a lot of your message is, well, what's your response to people who are worried about putting their career on hold to have a family or for 4 or 5 years, maybe even longer, almost pausing the progression of their career to dedicate more time to their family? Because this is where that guilt thing comes in. They want to keep the career moving. How do you respond to someone who's got that worry?
I talked to them about taking a long-term perspective, first of all, and that was really going back to that story about mum. And I also just talk about, what are your goals in life and what's important to you? And, I think we're all beginning to realize that, those old-style goals of achievement and money and, success at work are not the be-all and end-all. And, a lot of our happiness comes from relationships, from our family, and, this sort of search for inner peace, if you like. So I think that's the most compelling way of thinking about it. And to think of those examples, and we'll all have them in our lives, of people who started sort of successful careers or done things later in life, that, there is a lot of time in our careers. Most of us will have multiple careers actually during our working time. Coming back to that, take a longer term perspective.
One of the things that makes it really difficult, because what you're saying in many ways is almost interrupts the pattern of your life. And instead of almost running crazily on the treadmill of life, just stop and think, is it the right thing? The secondary challenge to that is busyness is like this epidemic, this over business. And Hugh Mackay, who you quote in your book, said busyness is becoming a self-administered therapy. So how do career mums, and in fact all professionals, how do they beat this business epidemic? Like, what do we do?
Yeah, just to emphasize, because I do think it is a weird thing in our lifetime that when you say to somebody, how are you? Busy. Busy is a standard response. And, isn't that really worrying? So how do you counter it? There's a brilliant book called The Rushing Woman's Syndrome, which really kind of brought this home to me, because the risk is, as a career mum or a career dad, if you like, that we do just end up running around like mad dogs. And this book, and credit to the author for calling it an epidemic, because I really do think it is, that, she really talks about increasingly she started to see these sort of stressed out mothers coming into her practice. And, she basically witnessed what she thought was a epidemic, or, just seeing lots and lots of people in the same mold. And we're running around like mad things. We've got every minute of the day allocated to a task. And what she talks about in the book is actually the health consequences of what that does to you. And it is very, very worrying. And I come back to the only antidote to that is the strategy, working out what's important to you and prioritizing based on that. The other thing that I think is a really good life skill is meditation and mindfulness, because I think that really allows you to zoom out a bit and work out, what you're doing and why, and just calm your life down a bit.
How do you, given that everyone is so busy, how do they find time to then meditate and spend a bit of time being mindful?
I think that's really hard. And I ended up doing things like meditation and exercise in the morning before the children woke up. And I don't know is the best way, but it really was the only time, waking up at 5:30 or something to squeeze those sort of things. I think that's so vital to your sanity, actually.
I couldn't agree more. And very often it is in the early morning, or for me, it's often before bed. I often decompress at the end of the day with a book and then some meditation and things like mind mapping to help me deal with overwhelm as well. Let's talk a bit about style, though. This is one of the 7 S's that you talk about in your book, and it's all about managing your personal brand at work. And one element of that, of course, is confidence and the confidence that you exude. But in your book, you sort of outline that women tend to overthink, have this incredible desire to be liked and to please, and these things impact confidence. It means that in the key moments when they need to make big plays or make calls or stand up and be counted, they don't. So how can working mums improve their confidence? Or if someone's leading a working with one, how can they support one?
Yeah, confidence, this whole issue of women's confidence has been a bit of a revelation to me. And, partly it's because I feel like I've lacked confidence in my own career. And this understanding that women's confidence can be lower than men's confidence, just the understanding that is the case and the sort of things that can drive that. And one of the things, interestingly, that is a driver of that is hormones. So, just men having more testosterone than women can make them more confident. But I'm not sure that women need to make themselves more confident, by the way. I've just read another book, a very good one, by Catherine Fox, called Stop Fixing Women. And her point is that, a lot of this gender diversity debate focuses too much on the fixing women, how do you improve confidence, and not enough on how do you actually improve structures within organizations and management to improve diversity. And I absolutely agree with that point. But a couple of things that have really helped me in this confidence journey have been, firstly, the study that I've done, qualifying as an actuary and doing an MBA kind of proved to me that I can do it. The other things, I think just getting older has made me more confident, getting more experience. There's a book called The Confidence Code, which talks a lot about why women are less confident than men. And as I said, just having that understanding has sort of been incredibly beneficial for me and how I operate, and understanding that lots of men lack confidence as well. That it's not something solely in women's.
No, definitely not. Talk about that in your book a little about when you feel like you're a fraud, or what I call imposter syndrome. And I've worked with countless executives, and I would say confidence would come up 75% of the time, and that's I've coached as many women as I have men, and this tends to consistently come up. Executives in these senior roles, and you walk into them and they're new to you, you don't have all the skill, you don't have all the experience behind you yet, you're going to question your confidence. But the key thing is it's generally not you, it's just you don't have the technical skill or the experience or the frameworks to make decisions.
Yeah, and I've recently been looking a bit at this whole issue of women in STEM careers. And interestingly, it comes up in schoolgirls as well. So it starts very early, and the way it comes up, girls' confidence in their maths ability compared to boys. So they're 25% less confident in maths than boys. And, that manifests in some pretty strange ways, because despite girls biologically being as good at maths as boys, in Australia, they've underperformed on the NAPLAN results in every single year group, every single year it's been run. So it's quite fascinating that this confidence thing, does play an ongoing role from an early age. I would just advocate being aware of the differences, and both a career person but also as a parent.
I actually think it's a really important point around diversity, because, in working with lots of executives and even in my own personal life, watching how these things play out around the house where, and this is a generalisation around men, they often tend to back themselves, often too much, even beyond their own ability, or their confidence that they exude is actually not necessarily warranted. And so having potentially the female perspective, which is once again a generalisation, but a bit more considered, wanting a bit more data, just making sure that everything is right. If the two came together and merged a bit better and had a happy medium, you'd have a really good decision-making team.
Yeah, well, that's actually one of my other ways of dealing with lack of confidence is to speak to my husband. Because, he is more confident than I am. And I'm often amazed if I go to him and, we have a chat about a business issue or, whatever it might be, or an interview I'm having, or, I'm often amazed at how different his approach is to mine. And I do think that's, it's been a great support for me.
I think there's a great question I often ask female executives around their decision-making and their ability to make moves, key strategic moves for the company they work for their own career. They'll say, I'm not 100% sure if this is the right thing to do. And I'll say, well, how certain do you have to be in your mind, how convinced you have to be in your mind out of 100 before you make a move? And I'll say nearly always, I need to be 90% ready for the next role or 100% certain in my head. When I ask that question to guys, it's more like 50, 60%. I only need to be 50% ready for the next job to take it. I only need to be 50% certain this is the right way because I'm happy to take a risk.
And interestingly, the counter to that is one of the, and this is gross generalizations, but when you look at what skills women bring to the table, we often talk about empathy, we talk about team, we talk about customer-centric, but one of the ones is also risk management, that the women often bring very good risk management skills to the table, which, might surprise some people, but definitely supports what you just said.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of very interesting decisions made over the years, particularly in a group, an exec team that's, almost all male, and some of them seem like they just haven't necessarily considered all the angles. A more careful perspective would be useful in those moments.
Righto, Chiefs. More from Nicolette in a minute. Now, recently I spoke to Dean Salakas, former CEO of The Party People. We spoke about being sale ready, forecasting like a CFO, and selling confidently on your terms. Here's what Dean had to say about managing an exit.
The biggest advice I give them is put time on your side. Start now. Don't be in a rush to sell. And if you can do that, I got to preface that by saying, once you do start, you get an interested party or whatever, you really got to put a timeline on it and start pressuring people, because everybody stuffs you around and drags a chain, and I'll get back to you next month, I'm too busy right now, all that stuff. And you'll never get to a point. You've actually got to put a deadline and say, if you don't give me an offer next week, you're out.
You can listen to that incredible conversation with Dean Salakas by going to chiefmaker.com/366. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the podcast and check out all the other great interviews with our chiefs and gurus, as well as all the minisodes by going to chiefmaker.com/listen now. Righto, Chief, let's get back to our best of series with Nicolette Rubinsztein.
Anyway, let's talk a bit about the staff of the 7S framework. Who are the working mums staff to get the job done at home and at work?
Well, when I wrote the book, I was very much focused on a career mum staff being firstly her husband or partner, which might, partner might not think of themselves like that. But really, the message is about dividing and conquering. That
yes, that's right.
Yep. Do and allocate responsibility. But the other angle here is around outsourcing, and particularly women who've got full-on careers, big jobs, and children as well. That one of my observations is that Australian women are very slow to take on the needed domestic help that you really need to thrive, if you like. So, I will meet partners of big accounting firms who have children and don't have a cleaner, for example, and it also goes to the extent that we use babysitters or nannies. And I think there's a lot of cultural reasons. I've really pondered this a lot because in some ways it really amazes me why we do what we do. We've got these very capable women in the workplace who, hiring and firing. But when it comes to our own domestic arrangements, we don't seem proactive at setting things up. So I think there's a big lesson there. We need to get more help, and we can't do everything. And it really will end in tears if you do try to do everything.
Yeah.
The other angle of staff is that, and I didn't talk about this in the book, but I've very much reflected on it since, is that I think for many successful career mums, their partner is a very important part of the equation, not just in terms of the tasks that they do and share, but in terms of being supportive of their partner. And, that obviously goes both ways. And, you've interviewed my husband before, but I'm very grateful to the support that he has provided me over the years. And I've just looked at other successful career women, and I often reflect on the fact that they've got very supportive partners in the background. And I think that probably also fits neatly under this staff.
Yeah, sure. Now, one thing you do mention in the book is, I think it's a quote from the movie 40 First Dates, I think, where Steve Carell is talking to Tina Fey, and it's all about letting your partner come through for you, and sometimes letting some things go and letting your husband do a few jobs for you that might not be at the same level of perfection as you would like, but at least they're getting done. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I think, a lot of us can be quite perfectionistic, and that is a real issue. And the older I get, the more I realize what the issues are with perfectionism. And I think particularly in your early career, perfectionism is a great thing and it's often the reason why many of us are successful. But, it comes with a whole lot of issues. And one of those is really sharing the role with your partner and letting them do it their way. And I think we have to drop some of those perfectionistic standards and, just take a deep breath and share the workload a bit more.
Yeah. And as a partner of a wife who's a very successful professional as well, sometimes it's really nice to be able to come through for her, even if I know sometimes I'm not quite living up to the standards she has for her house. It's nice to be able to do that for your partner, though. Now, Nicolette, you've got a paper that's been out recently on gender diversity in actuary. What are some of the conclusions coming out of that?
Yeah, so what I looked at was why are only 25% of our fellows female in the actuarial profession? And I really didn't know the answer to that question. I wondered whether, boys are better at maths than girls. I didn't know if it was the glass ceiling. I didn't know whether it was that girls just didn't want a career as an actuary. Anyway, I'm happy to say it was actually none of those things. And I ended up drawing on a few pieces of research that basically showed if we look at more recent years, the percentage of actuaries qualifying is higher than 25%. It's 33%. So that's good news. It is getting higher. If we look at the percentage of students at university studying actuarial, it's a third female. And then if you go right the way back to the beginning of the pipeline at school, it is, and you look at the percentage of kids doing advanced maths at school that are female, interestingly, it's also a third. So the key conclusion was actually until we improve or increase that percentage of kids doing advanced maths, we're not going to improve gender diversity in actuaries or probably many other STEM subjects as well, STEM careers. So actuaries are quite a small case study in the scheme of things, but it would equally apply to, engineering, technology, a lot of areas like that. So I ended up looking at, why is the percentage of girls doing advanced maths so low? And there was two key reasons. One of them is that confidence issue that I mentioned earlier. Girls are less confident. So they're biologically as good at maths, but less confident in their maths ability. And I'm quite optimistic about that because there's some research that shows that some training around growth mindset can actually address those confidence issues.
That's good.
The second issue is much more worrying, and it's really a gender stereotyping issue that we're really not encouraging our girls to do maths at school as a society and as a culture. Other countries do a much better job. So if you look at places like China, Malaysia, Singapore, and interestingly, some of the Middle Eastern countries, they have a much higher take-up of STEM subjects than we do. So, that's really a cultural phenomenon in Australia. And I think there was a strong message for parents of daughters about encouraging them to do those STEM subjects, particularly because, the research suggests that 75% of future jobs will require STEM skills. And I, would like to see a lot more cultural focus on girls and STEM.
No, that's fantastic. Look, within your book as well, you talk quite a bit about diversity and quotas and things. We don't have time to go into that today, but there's some really good insights in there about understanding gender targets and things like that, which I think are really spot on. So, Nicolette, a couple of final questions before you go. Is that all right?
Yes, absolutely.
What is the number one book you'd recommend every middle executive read?
My favourite book at the moment is the Yuval Harari Homo Deus, and it really changed my perspective on the future. And I think that's really important, particularly for sort of middle executives in terms of having a view on the big picture. Yeah.
Funnily enough, I'm literally halfway through that book as we speak, and it is really good. And if you haven't read Sapiens before, I recommend reading that first because it's a very good precursor. What is the next thing in life you're most excited about?
Well, on a professional basis, I'm president of the Actuaries Institute this year, and I'm absolutely loving that and really hoping to make a contribution there. On a personal level, I'm going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro in January with my two sisters and my brother, so I'm incredibly excited about that.
Oh, fantastic. That'll be magic. Okay, what are you most grateful for in life?
My husband and my children, without a doubt.
Perfect. Can you nominate another chief that you hold with great respect you think should be on the podcast?
Yes, I would like to nominate Helen Rowell, who is one of our leading female actuaries, and she is also deputy chair at APRA. So, she's that's a huge role, and particularly in light of the Royal Commission into financial services.
Oh, fantastic. We'll see if we can get a hold of Helen. Now, if you could lead one organisation, anyone in the entire world, but it can't be your own, what would that be?
It would probably be Greenpeace. I feel quite passionately about climate change and the issues and the current political situation. So, it would be Greenpeace.
Nice. Okay. What do you think is your final message of wisdom and hope that is vital for the next generation of executive mothers?
I would like the next generation to redefine feminine leadership, which I think is a lot more about being yourself in the workplace and bringing, some of those traditional female traits to the board tables and management tables. And that's sort of some of those traits that I was mentioning earlier around empathy, compassion, customer focus, team-based behavior. So I think we have a lot to offer, and that we should just have the confidence to be ourselves and bring those skills to the work.
Absolutely brilliant. Nicolette, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on The Inner Chief. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Greg. It's been a pleasure too.
Chief, that sums it up for this week, and a wonderful chat to an incredible woman. Nicolette has had a very successful career, and her wise head still leads some of the most important organisations in Australia and the Pacific. You can get all the links and resources, including how to connect with Nicolette, by going to chiefmaker.com/367. And if you would like to stay in touch and hear all about some of the best resources that you can find anywhere in the world to improve your performance at work, go to chiefmaker.com/subscribe. Now, Chief, if you're yet to rate the episode and subscribe, I hope you'll do so soon. It helps others see the magnificent value that the chiefs and gurus bring to their life and career. So make sure you hit subscribe on your podcast app now, give it a 5-star rating if you think it's worthy, and leave a short review about your favourite episode. Righto, Chiefs, as always, remember to stay epic.